I'm going to talk a little bit today about the new right. And unfortunately, I don't know how this is going to go because the place that I'm hosting this has incredibly bad taste in music and they tend to play it too loud. Right now, I've got a bit of silence and I'm hoping I can convince them to keep it that way. Now, you know that I position the new right as the spectrum of all of us from the my rather analytic sort of perspective down to the alt-right. And so I see the new right as the transition of the old right into, as us abandoning the hopefulness of the old right, or the wishful thinking of the old right, and instead focus and becoming the hopeless right, or the resigned right, or the right that has accepted the fact that the desire of the Western man to believe that the aristocracy of everyone is possible, we've just abandoned it at each level of our classes. So today, on and off, that's the topic I'm going to cover is the new right in the class structure. Now, I'm going to outline this as the hopeless right. Yeah, well, we're the hopeless. We've lost all hope, and the left will learn, and we've lost our. It's like the parent who gives up on his child when he says, "Actually, I tried really hard, but I made a loser. It's time to throw in the towel." And I think that's what the right has to do, or we have done, is the new right and the alt-right and the various conservative libertarians that are slowly becoming us. We've abandoned the belief or the hope that there's anybody's going to learn, and those of us who've been in this position for a long time, we have gotten to where we say, well, of course we're right. We were right all along. The conservatives were right all along. The problem with the conservatives is that they lacked a rational and scientific language for discussing their ancient, traditional, moral, and semi-religious arguments. Hi, guys. Yes, thank you for joining. I'm talking about the new right. So if you followed me for a long time, you know that I tend to work by class structures and group evolutionary strategies and various other evolutionary strategies. And I tend to start with the fact that gender, we're not identical, we're not useful, we're not equal, we are compatible, and we're compatible across a time preference spectrum or a time strategy spectrum, in the sense that the female bias is a very short-term temporal spectrum focused on consumption. The sort of brother or bias is productively or libertarian oriented, which is he wants to be able to develop capital or develop skills or develop something to trade so that he can gain status and access to reproduction. And the paternal or father or alpha figure is trying to make sure that the tribe is long-term competitively sustainable. And if you look at the work done by in research, and of course I like to promote John Haidt, but in that sense, John Haidt has been extremely successful in measuring the moral of the different moral intuitions each of us possess, how the left and feminine, the middle and libertarian, or the brother and libertarian, and the right conservative and masculine have the same moral basis. It's just that we attach very different weights to them, whereas conservatives tend to treat all moral imperatives as a portfolio that's fairly equal. Libertarians tend to treat hierarchy and sanctity and purity as lower concerns for them, and they tend to prefer new stimulation. This is normal for an emerging new generation to rebel against the limits that are out there, but still try to add value. And the feminine or short-term version values very almost, doesn't not only not value hierarchy and sanctity and order, but actually rebels against it and focuses almost entirely on the effort of each of us to effort of the left to focus on caretaking and maintaining group cohesion. So this is the way that, of course, we controlled alphas. So that's the gender specialization in reproduction, or basically the human division of perception into short, medium, and long time preferences that reflect the reproductive needs of women, the mating needs of young males, and the tendency of males who've been successful at putting a tribe together, at holding on to their herd of females and maintaining their reproductive ability. So that's the gender's time preference. The next layer, Izvinite. Hey! The next level of specialization is that now we have gender specializations. We also have coercive specializations. So each of these groups developed a coercive specialization. Gossip was the way that women learned to rally other males and women against alphas and control them. Libertarians work on trade. They lack neither sexual resources to trade with or power structures to trade with, so they actually end up at production. And the conservatives end up working with force. Basically, they've built enough reputation and strength over time that they basically deal with force and order. So you develop over time not only you develop specializations, in other words, people who are very, very good in the deployment and implementation of gossip, morality, shaming, rallying. You develop literature, ideation, trying to get people to work together toward an end. You have people who, like myself, who are very libertarian oriented, trying to generate wealth because we want to be able to make our position in the world. And you have people on who have strength, who try to organize the world, specialize in the creation of war, force, order, law, and extract revenues in exchange for it. So this is the specialization of coercion, because there are only those three ways of coercing people: gossip, rally, shaming. In other words, inclusion and exclusion from opportunity. Trade, in other words, inclusion in opportunity to benefit, or exclusion from opportunity to benefit. And force, which is circumvention of violence, or the application of violence. And so we have a time preference of progressive female libertarian brotherhood and conservative masculine. And in each of these genders, we actually create a coercive specialization: gossip to control the alphas, trade to help to deal with the emerging layer of leaders, and the force to control the order and establish limits. So I always think of this as advocacy, practicality, and limits. And we've developed this division of specialization just like bees have developed their own specializations. Now, this next problem we run into is class. Now, you've probably noticed, and I would say we can reduce this set of basic ideas in the world to a very small number. Various estimates you see around is that the number of fundamental ideas is, not much more than 1,000 and maybe 2,000 at the outside. And I suspect that if we understand the fundamental rules of the universe, it's a lot smaller set of rules than that govern the world. Ms. Venetia, can you keep this? Sorry, I have to ask them to keep the volume a little lower while I talk to you. So, so every 10 points of IQ requires a different argument. So even if there are only, let's say, 1,000 different categories of argument, there are, in addition to that, for every 10 points of IQ, we need a different way of communicating that basic idea or argument. Theory, whatever we have, bit of useful information. So even if we have only 1,000 or 100 basic ideas, we need X number of class level addresses. Now these every 10 points of IQ are important because they basically determine how we learn. You can learn through ideation. People like me, we just absorb a lot of stuff and we create new stuff. We have people who are great synthesists. These people tend to be in the 130s, and it tends to take about 130 to synthesize new ideas, communicate it, and write about it. A lot of writers and a lot of people are up in that age. You have to be in the 120s to sort of invent a new machine, a new process. And we find that people in the 120s tend to do that. You have to be in the 1-teens to be able to perform research on your own, in other words, study independently, and you have to be in the 100s in order to be able to sort of be taught instructively by verbally. In other words, you can learn by instruction and verbalism. Below that, you get into people who have to learn by doing, and below that, you get to people who have to learn by a lot of doing, and below that, you get to people who it's not so good, unless they really work at it. And so we have a class structure that is reflects our different abilities. And, of course there's a lot of overlap. And when we're talking about classes, we can talk about genetic classes, how sexually desirable you are, how desirable you are for friendship, how desirable you are for associating with, how desirable for how low do you go? Well, I always say below, I'm not really sure you're human below 70, and I'm pretty sure we don't want anybody below 85. So we have these rates of knowledge, and we divide our organization into the people who lead by ideas, lead by communicating, lead by organizing, lead by calculating or whatever, and lead by managing, and then down to doing. And those doers, they're the most. There's a good chunk of the population, most of it. So we have a class structure, and our human orders fall into this, and our occupations fall into this set. And of course, there's a lot of overlap because we also have the other person problem. Like I said, there's genetic, social, and economic class structures. We also have this problem of personality. So if you have a lot of impulsivity, you have a lot of what's the problem? I always disagree with this, but the idea that you worry about things a lot, in psychology, this has a negative connotation. And so I just prefer to say you're the kind of person who worries a lot, obsesses about worrying, versus the kind of person who's confident and comfortable with the way things are. Then you also have the issue of openness to experience, how much new stimulation you need. And then how autistic or solipsistic you are. I don't want to get into the big 5, big 6 psychological properties argument because I've addressed that elsewhere. So in that, to further that end, we have a class structure that's basically by IQ and then varies a lot by personality type. So if you're a person with 100 IQ, you can get graduate from university, because if you have the right personality, you can perform the same work as a person with 110 IQ if you have you have the patience and discipline to do it. Whereas we have plenty of smart people, and I'm not sure I'm not one of them, who have all sorts of wacky personality traits, and they sort of inhibit us from performing at the levels that we'd like to. There's a lot of very dysfunctional people who have very high IQs. Matter of fact, that might be what allows us to have high IQs. So we have that class structure in place. So now for each of this IQ class personality structure, all right, we have this. We have 3 specializations, right? Gossip, trade, and force. We have intertemporal bias, so the female short, libertarian middle, long-term masculine. Now we need arguments to talk to all these people. And so what we tend to do is we tend to create, speak for yourself about what? We need to have arguments for all these people. So we have emotive arguments. I don't like that, it's tough. You're talking about visceral reaction. We have expressionary arguments, where it's what I think of as rallying, shaming, all this alt-right stuff we do. The stuff that's really about inclusion or exclusion, using guilt, or as the Marxist left's Jewish do, is heaping of undue praise. In other words, you rally around somebody, you give lots of praise, and somebody isn't worth it. You try to promote somebody over some others because you say they're better when they're not. This is so you can both rally negatively and you can rally positively. So we see a lot of rallying going on in the next level. In the level above that, you start to enter into the class structure where you're actually trying to get into moral argument. Now, moral argument, unlike the emotional expression or like the original or like the reactionary expression, moral argument begins to have structure to it. It still reflects cognitive biases, emotional, class, and gender biases, but you have this what we call moral argument. Above that, beyond moral argument, you start to get into what's called historical or analogical argument. At this point, you're starting to use evidence, not opinion, not expression, not intuition, but you're starting to use evidence. And when you use these historical arguments, you see this. You can see these levels, right, as I'm talking about them. You can see them in each part of the political spectrum, people using each level of argument. And these level of arguments do correspond roughly to the class structures I'm talking about and their methods. So let's go to next to we get a historical argument. Now after that we get somewhere in here we get rational argument. Now a rational argument isn't just analogistic. It's an attempt to say this is to use the principle of non-contradiction to say this isn't possible or that can't be true. Now technically there's a difference between reason, which is much looser, and you're just saying, well, does this make sense? Is this understandable? And rationalism, which means, is this contradictory, non-contradictory? In other words, is this possible given what we know? Beyond the level of rationalism, we start to enter the realm of empiricism. Now, empiricism has a really strange number of connotations to it, but what it basically is you've gone from trying to justify, which is what all those previous layers were. I'm trying to justify what I believe, say why it's within the group interest, say how it corresponds to entity, to where you get to empiricism, where you're trying to engage in criticism. You're trying to see if maybe something exists, but how do I scrutinize this to make sure that it isn't constructed out of error, bias, wishful thinking, suggestion, obscurantism, pseudoscience, or deceit? How do I know it isn't one of the falsehoods that humans are so susceptible to because we didn't evolve for the purpose of conducting truthful argument? In other words, objective argument independent of opinion. We evolved in tribes, in family groups, and when we going through this evolution, we evolved to negotiate based on norms, traditions, and accepted understanding of personality. We didn't evolve to speak truthfully, which is to launder those ideas from our truth. This is why it took us so long to get to the Greek era, where we develop reason out of juridical defense, right? I mean, that's where reason comes from. It comes from law, just like empiricism in the Baconian sense in England comes from law. So what you see is my lunch is here. What you see is Yakuyu. Yakuyu is Ukrainian for thank you. Mojna is please, can I? Can I? So you enter up into this. Shoot, did I lose my train of thought there? No, empiricism. So when you enter empiricism, you're beginning to criticize, to not just say, look, you're trying to say, use reason, rationalism, and empiricism to criticize, to look at it as whether it's possible. Now, above empiricism, we get into what we don't think of today, but we call science. Now, science went through a very interesting change, and I gave this, if you haven't seen the talk Butch Leghorn put out on the failure of the 20th century and why, for early part of the 20th century to discover truth and why, it's really reducible to the basic problem that just like we justified everything up until a certain point of time, once we reached the Industrial Revolution and the point that we expanded human cooperation, human population sizes, the diversity of production, beyond humans, our understanding of the universe, large and small, beyond human scale. What happened was we ran into this problem of we need to switch from justification in social science to criticism, just as we needed to switch from reason, rationalism in other fields to empiricism. And our guys couldn't come up with it. In other words, our philosophers couldn't come up with it. Actually, they did come up with it. They came up with Brigman discovered it in physics, Brewer discovered it in mathematics, Mises discovered it in economics. And this basic, Popper discovered it in philosophy, or in the research, scientific study, and that is that if you can't articulate something as a sequence of existentially possible operations, in other words, you can't say how this moves from this to this, what causes change in state as a sequence, we don't know that whatever you're talking about is not just correlative but completely wrong, and whether it's existentially possible. Now, a lot of people railed against this because it was most prominent in mathematics, because we had this problem of Cantor, where Cantor brought in, he reawakened mathematical Platonism. Yes, you're right. Problem is most people haven't made that switch. They still engage in justificationism because we live moral lives. We don't live scientific lives. We interact with people on a moral basis, on a social basis. Of course we haven't switched, the public over to empirical thought or post-empirical operational thought. We haven't moved the population. We have moved them to statistical thought, to correlative thought. People can say that. Matter of fact, one of the things you'll notice when you listen to people talk, when they stutter, look at what they're doing. The reason they're stuttering is they're trying to take a Germanic declarative language of certainty and reposition it in modern language as statistical possibility. In other words, uncertainty. So you'll notice, once you start noticing that, you'll notice how often everybody rephrases their words to speak probabilistically rather than with certainty. So we've entered the age of operationalism. Now, the problem we have to enter into, the reason we've gotten in it, is the next level, which is objective moralism. In other words, in libertarians, we have discovered some time ago, thanks to Mr. Locke and his predecessors, thanks to Murray Rothbard and his attempt to take it farther, and thanks to Hoppe. I criticize these guys, but it's not that they haven't contributed. I'm criticizing that they're using the wrong method of argument, justification, to explain what's a critical analysis, which is a scientific analysis, which is that you can reduce everything to every positive assertion about social science into a statement of property rights, because you can reduce all natural law to a prohibition on the imposition of costs upon that which others have expended cost upon to obtain, whether that be genetic, kinship, mates, whether it be your body, whether it be physical property, it be the relations you have, the normative or the institutional structures, or even the traditions and myths. People defend their traditions and myths for a reason. It's their property. Now we say, well, we're not going to ensure traditions and myths like we're going to ensure physical property. That's where we differentiate between property in total, which is demonstrated human property, and property rights, which is that which we will collectively ensure. Now, this problem has been is that even though we've moved through this hierarchy of argument all the way up to the rational, empirical, scientific, in other words, operational, and objectively social science, moral, and I'll get into other properties another time, which is the issue of scope, which is really just a technical form of criticism. It's what Popper got wrong when he talked about falsificationism. When we got up to this position, we entered this, how do I say this? We haven't, like you said, we haven't brought people here, and it's actually pretty difficult. So what's happened now is what is an operation? Mental events. They don't have to be empirically observable. They have to be sympathetically testable. This is a really good question, relative commotion. You're saying, what's observable? Well, in the physical world, we're talking about the physical world. We don't know the first properties of the physical world. We're trying to find them, and once we do understand them, maybe we'll be able to create an axiomatic representation of the physical world so that we can describe each operation as it naturally occurs. Right? If we don't know that yet, and so we can't. So what we do instead is we say, what operations do we perform in order to obtain this measurement so that we know that the only information you're conveying to us is that which empirically present or actually present in reality, rather than subjectively intuited or inserted by you as error, bias, wishful thinking, or deception. And so an operation in the physical world has to be described as a measurement. But, however, when we talk to other people, right, when we talk to other humans, we're talking about social science. Again, this is what Mises almost got right. Sorry, I had to re-record this. What Mises got right is that in the social sciences, we do know the first principles. And we know that because we know we can cooperate with each other. We can cooperate with each other because we can sympathetically test each other's intentions. And if given enough information, we can empathize with the decisions that other people make. So, if we can reduce any statement about economics or social science to something we can experience, we can subjectively test it, just like we do in court and juries do all the time. So that's what separates our subjective perception of social reality from the problem we have of operationalism in scientific reality. So what I was getting to is that we have argumentative forms, and that what you see is these argumentative forms basically reflect class abilities, and that what you see in the new right, which is the what I perceive myself as doing, is changing from the old right, the hopeful right, the belief that if we just give them enough information, if we just show them a way, everyone will join the aristocracy, the aristocracy of everyone in the Christian Aryan Anglo tradition. And they don't want anything to do with it because, like I said, it's not in their genetic interest to pursue that strategy. So instead, what we have is we have argumentative structures at every 10 points of IQ or so, or every class level. And what you see today is people like me in the new right trying to talk about force, common law, and absolute science, what I call truth, empirical truth. And below it, you have a class of guys that are talking academically. You have the people who are into HBD and into the genetic differences between us, into proving that humans have been domesticated, just like all other animals, by our noble classes who used violence, organized violence, to forcibly domesticate us against our will by incrementally suppressing our ability to engage in parasitism, and therefore and thereby forcing us incrementally into more and more of our efforts being put into productive rather than parasitic activities, to the point where in some civilizations, notably East and West, we've pretty much exterminated most of the lower classes that were parasitic out of necessity because they had little ability to contribute for personality and ability reasons. So we've domesticated man. We need to understand that's what we did, and that the reason that we're wealthy and other groups are poor, why we advance quickly and other groups advance more slowly or don't advance much at all, is because we've been more domesticated, and maybe too domesticated, and others have been less. And we can see this in all sorts of measurements. Testosterone levels is probably the most obvious one, degrees of sexual maturity is the other most obvious one, and the category of sexual dimorphism is the other one. So we can measure all these things all the way down to how babies act in cribs, how pliable they are at what ages, how fast they mature. We can see all this in different groups, and so this is what has created the difference between us. Like I've said, we can map these arguments to different classes. So you're going to get the despotic, Nazi right down there in the working class who's very angry, and they're just looking for any answer that justifies how they feel. You're going to get alt-righters who come in at multiple levels, and they're going to come in and use ridicule and humor and sarcasm. They're going to abandon the aristocratic prohibition on ridicule, because that's what we had duels before. You get killed over this stuff. They're going to abandon the aristocratic prohibition on libel, slander, shaming, and rallying, just like the left has. You're going to have a group of people that come out that are critics. They're going to apply the critical method. I think of Ramsey Paul and those guys as that method. They have criticisms, no solutions, but they have criticisms. You're going to have educators. You're going to have people like Molyneux and Tom Woods who come along and say, they still hold on to a little of the hopefulness. You see them slowly changing as they realize that the wealth generated by the 19th and 20th century made a lot of behavior permissible that really isn't, and that we no longer possess that luxury, and so they're switching from libertarian, from benevolent libertarian to conservative libertarian, or to what I would say is the new right, which is still libertarian, but it's hopeless. We don't place hope on it. And then you're going to find people, academics, in other words, not communicators, but intellectuals, like Ricardo Duchesne, and who's the guy that does culture of critique? You're going to find, I can't believe I'm forgetting it, MacDonald. You're going to find MacDonald in there. You're going to find people who are still private sector researchers, because the kind of work we do isn't permitted, or certainly isn't socially acceptable, like HBD Chick on her research into clannishness, marital techniques. You're going to find somebody like J-Man, who is one J-Man, and what's the other, Sue or whatever his name is, that does the genetic analysis. Yes, J-Man. Who's the Asian guy that does the genetic research? Thanks, Butch. You're going to find the guys who do IQ research that are just, well, it's what it is. You're going to find all these people, and basically these people like me, I couldn't get. I don't know how I would. I mean, even though basically, if you look at what I talk about, I sound like a progressive when I talk about institutional solutions. So even me, I'm basically compatibilist. I'm saying we should just create markets in government, markets for everything. But I mean, can you imagine trying to do the research I've done in the university setting? I mean, I'd get coerced out of it. So I can understand why a lot of this happens in fringe movements, because just like the church protected its revenue streams, the academy produces its revenue streams. The academy can't tolerate disenfranchising customers, people who want, we call them diplomas, but they're really, what did the church sell? Indulgences. Of course our best academies produce smart people, but that's the part up here that we always talk about, the good research, the good schools, but underneath that we sell a lot of indulgences, and that the profitability of those indulgences, diplomas, would be dramatically harmed if we were to talk about truth and the truth of human differences, and democracy would be dramatically undermined by the fact that majority is actually a bad idea. Why don't we have a market for cooperation like we had under the Anglo model, where we have a house for different classes and the classes exchange? Why do we have this majoritarian democracy that creates a monopoly ruled by majority? So this would all be undermined. This would all be undermined in the great promise that you can be saved by buying your indulgence from the academy, which has replaced the church. That would be undermined. I can understand it. So that's why the university setting doesn't want it. It would create friction for professors in their classrooms. The same reason that we don't teach truthfulness, rhetoric. We don't teach history, rhetoric, grammar, and logic, nor do we teach law, economics, and accounting and finance into the... we don't teach those things in grade school, even though there's nothing in basic economics isn't comprehensible by a 14-year-old. Obviously capital flows and processes and these things are, measurement of them is one thing, but the basic idea is pretty simple. Yeah, Richard, I'll post this to YouTube, and I'll put an intro and exit on it when I'm done. It's just easier for me if I have you guys to talk to, because otherwise I feel like I'm talking to myself, and harder for me to work. So that's why I like this venue. So of course we're going to see this hierarchy. There's guys like me who are people. I think some of you understand this, but the reality is that just as reason was a profound innovation over allegory, just as rationalism was a profound innovation over reason, and just as empiricism was a profound innovation over rationalism, and just as operationalism was a profound innovation over empiricism, I think social science, in other words, what I'm proposing is that we can unify philosophy, we can unify philosophy and science and law and morality in biology into a single universal language, discourse about it in a single universal language. I think this is going to have the same level of profound effect as did each previous generation of innovations, and I can imagine that the consequence for humanity, if they were to, we can institutionalize these new ideas, will be as great as the innovations of reason, rationalism, empiricism, and operationalism. I think what we'll see is as great an innovation in human performance and behavior as what we've seen in those past iterations. And so that's why I think this stuff is very important. But getting back to the different new right, what we see in the right is we see people like me, people, theorists like me, although I don't know if there's actually anybody out there anywhere near what I do. There's the academic researchers, the communicators, the people below that who are critics, the people who that engage in ridicule, the people who below that engage in emotional outbursts, and really these are just class structures using the argumentative structures available to them to conduct arguments. And I think that we're all, whether you want, I don't want to call us the alt-right because that's a class structure. I think the new right consists of all of these: the theoretical right, new right me, the empirical new right, the informative or educational new right, the critical new right, the ridicule new right, the alt-right, and the exasperated or angry new right, which is our working class who pays the price for the failure of their leadership, their elites, to protect them. Which is stupid because they're the ones who fight. We don't. We just talk. It's those guys that fight that make the difference. We just give them license. So what was the next point I needed to make? I want to criticize monopoly government. In other words, our enfranchisement. We came out with this movement of what we call democracy and the Enlightenment in an effort to seize power by the middle class, or the emerging industrial classes and financial classes and middle classes, to seize power from the landed aristocracy, who are no longer the primary determinants of organizing economic production. Well, so we created this great fiction that everybody was oppressed rather than everyone was domesticated, and that now we had enough wealth to tolerate the costs of attempting to include the NRX is the new right that ought to be working on reform Christian. Yeah, that's true. They're monks and priests. Neo-reaction, you can look at it this way. Neo-reaction, I always break things into Enlightenment class structures. Neo-reaction, Moldbug is a cosmopolitan Jew. He uses critique, right? That's what he does. He uses criticism. He does try to come up with a solution, but his solution is anarchic and and it's also kind of fanciful. Hans is a German. Tries to come up with a German nationalist solution to return us to the prior era when there were a lot of small states. Pretty good. Unfortunately, he does it with Rothbardian intersubjectively verifiable property instead of doing it with property in toto, in other words, demonstrated human property. And in other words, he's too concerned with creating stateless decidability, which is what he and Rothbard are doing, instead of understanding that the problem is conflict and suppressing parasitism so that we eliminate conflict and all the transaction costs that are associated with conflict so that we can work closer in higher density, produce lower opportunity costs, and seize them by a process of what you and I call competition. So we told a big lie. Just like it was a well-meaning lie, but it was a big lie. Everybody doesn't want to be part of aristocracy. Every Enlightenment thinker lied. It was wrong. Hobbes and Locke are sort of wrong. Certainly Rousseau was smoking something from Asia. Kant was just trying to restate Christianity as Germanicized Christianity, which is really a combination of the ancient oath and Christian authority. It's very Aryan. He's trying to restate it as in rationalism without the mysticism. The Jewish Enlightenment comes along in parallel with the Russian literary Enlightenment. The Russians use literature instead of rationalism or empiricism, whatever. And the Jews come along with what we think they turned their legalism, their conflation of mysticism and legalism, into a conflationism of pseudoscience and pseudo-rationalism. And we get the Jewish pseudosciences. And because they're last, it's like any technology. The first one creates all the disruption, and then the last technology that comes out tends to be the best one, or the one that has the most market power. So they came along last, just as the Industrial Revolution was hitting mass scale, and this gave them both. This gave the pseudosciences, post-Darwin especially, control of the academy, control of the market, the use of mass media, and the luxury of paying for all these, the wealth necessary to allow all these people to move up into the consumer class, despite not demonstrating the behavior or forcing them to continue the behavior that had previously been necessary to join the middle class and join the franchise. Then we brought in women, and then we brought in women have the opposite reproductive strategy. They proceeded very quickly to dismantle the family, and then we brought in what do you call it? In order to finance war and the continental expansion, colonialism, we brought in fiat currency, which allowed us even more flexibility. What we didn't do is we didn't at the same time maintain the market for commons in government by each house getting its own structure, so that we weren't ruled by majority but by a market for exchanges. And what we also didn't do is we didn't require the ancient prohibition on ridicule, rallying, shaming, libel, slander, pseudoscience, and lying in the commons that men had held each other to under threat of death. And so we didn't hold these new underclasses accountable to the same aristocratic traditions that forced us to use a market for reproduction, marriage, a market for production, the marketplace, and a market for commons to cooperate between the classes. And so what happened instead was that we made the government not able to provide a resolution for differences between these classes and genders. We forced argument, we forced honesty out of both the government, we forced deceit into it, and we forced pseudoscience into it, and we forced the compromise out of the family. In other words, instead of gender compromise happening within the family and the family having one vote, what we did is we forced the compromise of the genders into the government, and this is what we've seen is this huge set of conflicts resulting in pseudoscience and lies, and eventually the surrender by the left, which is going on now, that they can convince us they must just resort to tyranny, and the surrender by the right that we can mature these people into joining the aristocracy, and our understanding that we have to resort, like they do, to force and violence in order to restore our two sides to compromise. Anyway, so what my proposition is that this is what the new right is. Our job is to use violence, force, to demand restoration of the markets for marriage, for production, and for commons, so that we trade between classes. We don't create false goods. I think we will calculate goods better than we can pseudo-empirically calculate false goods. And so that's the objective of my work, why I'm so profoundly focused on truth, is because when you have truth, it gets very difficult to lie. And if you punish lies, deceit, pseudoscience, and whatever, when they are tried to use to obscure fraud, then we can restore truth and trade to the classes. And we can cooperate because we're compatible, not fight because we're all lying. And so that's the end of my sort of argument. Okay, so that's my speech. I have no idea how long that went. That was pretty long. If you have questions, please let me know what they are. So I'd like to summarize, if you'll let me. I tried to combine two basic ideas. One is the Propertarian class structure, which consists of the reproductive classes, the coercive specializations that reflect the demands of those classes, the genetic classes, from less or more desirable for us to associate with, the intelligence classes, so that every 10 points of IQ from 140 on down, there tends to be a different argumentative structure, because there's a different way of framing the world, because there's a different rate of learning. This tends to reflect the occupational classes, such as repeating by doing, by listening, by reading, by researching, by invention, by synthesis, and then finally by innovation. And each of these classes and these occupational structures along these intelligence lines tend to use different argumentative techniques. Emotive, opinion, moral, historical, rational, empirical, operational, parsimonious. The last two you probably don't know much about. I try to combine this with the new right's positioning, which is that if you look at the new right, it consists of a bunch of groups reflecting a number of different social classes. And so I try to tie those ideas to show how propertarian class theory fits. Russell Moore. Hi, Kurt. Question. Can Spengler's work, The Decline of the West, be thought of as part of the German Enlightenment culture with its Well, yes, one of the things you hear me talk about in truth is categorical consistency, and that means non-conflation. So the Germans conflate literature and reason. They somewhat resist bringing religion in, but their moralization is at such high level, I would call that religion. The empirical analysis is to launder those things from it. What I see is I don't discount that Spengler's wrong. In other words, I don't say he's wrong any more than I say Hegel is wrong. I say that these are inactionable ways that give you a little bit of information, false goods, right? Will they don't? They're goods that pretend to fill a market demand for understanding, and because they have so much falsehood in them, they fail. And by giving us a satisfactory answer, they do what Popper warned against, is they prevent us from getting the correct answer, the true answer. And this is what one of my favorite articles by Popper is his sources of knowledge and ignorance. Well, how can there be a source of ignorance? Well, there can be. You can create an idea, the Muslim idea of the completeness of Allah's prophecy. Of Muhammad's prophecy, and the completeness of this, the authoritarianism. You can create ignorance. The other one I always bring up in their society is just a very interesting one is that they demand respect without earning it, and so this limits your ability to correct people for believing bad things. Yes, pseudoscience is a false good. I actually have the same problem with the Enlightenment mythos of the potential aristocracy of everybody, the Enlightenment fallacy that man was oppressed. Man wasn't oppressed. We had pretty benevolent rulers who taxed us like hell for the high cost and the high value of domesticating us like any other animal. So I'll go back to we weren't lied to. We weren't we were domesticated. So I want to get rid of all these sources of ignorance. In fact, this ties back to our problem, our primary issue, intellectual issue facing this generation, which is our era isn't about expanding human scale any longer, justification. It's about how do we get beyond human scale, and that means criticizing our imaginations, not criticizing our internal experiences. Jay, I'll answer the question about Hop in a minute. So we need to criticize these different movements. I want to answer this Hop question because most of you know I have feel like Hop gave me the answer right now. I knew when I was listening to Hans that he had a profound insight, but something was wrong. And what's wrong is his Kantian justificationism, his false criticism of Karl Popper, and all this justificationary nonsense. On the other hand, if you look at his first real paper, which is on incentives, and you look at all the deductions he's made from the theory of incentives, he's really proud of argumentation, which is complete nonsense because there's no contract yet. His idea of contractualism, well, it doesn't handle the problem of incentives. So I see all these issues in Hans, and I've written quite a bit about this, and I think I've thoroughly enumerated the criticisms. However, these are all his criticisms for the excuse of property. Once you get to property is the basic theme, a basic principle of social science. In other words, the positive assertion, in other words, the right, of the negative prohibition. In other words, the general rule of negative prohibition, where property rights are the individual instances of positive application, then you understand that property rights can be used to articulate anything, basically every concept in not only social science, but in psychology, but in biology. And this is what I've tried to do, is I've tried to restate this scientifically instead of this nonsense German Kantian bullshit and the nonsense Jewish pseudoscience. But if you look at Rothbard's, what Rothbard tried to do with his erroneous limitation of property to intersubjectively verifiable, and you look at what Hoppe did by abridging that and saying, well, let's let this evolve after the intersubjectively verifiable, let's leave it open to contractualism instead of where I would leave it as say, well, it's universal rule, it doesn't need to be open. There's no contractualism at all. You can say, well, everything Hoppe deduces is right. I mean, that's why he's right on immigration, for example. So his use of this is all really good. What I don't like the reason you see me attack the Austrian, it's not really Austrian, it's Lvivian, because the people we call about as Austrians, and the Mises Institute sort of gets around, they're from Poland and Ukraine, they're not from Austria. So they were part of the Austrian Empire, but there's nothing much Austrian about them. They're actually border people talking in borderland language, with borderland ethics and borderland morality. So the reason I rail against the the Polish-Ukrainians who pretend they're Austrians is because of this pseudoscience. Pseudoscience, Mises' categorization of logic for the purpose of criticism as a science for the purpose of justification. I mean, come on. Rothbard's use of Rothbard's taking Mises' basic error here and just moving it all over the place. Now, Rothbard's I've written about this extensively. Or Hoppe picking up on Rothbard's insights and Hoppe's one of those guys who's really loyal, and he's a bright fellow. I mean, I learned a lot from him. But he's gone off on this nonsense, and he's just so heavily invested in it. And now he's so basically retired. He's in a position where it's a social group for him, and he wants to enjoy his social group because, frankly, the politically correct bullshit world attacked him. Almost, I've had this kind of thing happen. I know how bad it is for your health. And so he's sort of in this. He's not really trying to advance liberty. He's trying to maintain his ideas and popularize them and maintain his friendship alliances. This is what he's doing. But me, I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to repair the Jewish, German, Anglo fallacies of the Enlightenment and trying to return them to their basis as law. The prohibition on parasitism is the basis of social science. Well, of course, libertarianism is a social thing for most libertarians, is because the reason you become a libertarian, any left-leaning libertarian, anything but the most conservative libertarian, which is what I consider myself, you're doing that because you're a social outcast almost all the time, and you don't want to pay for the commons. And what libertarianism is a way to say this commons doesn't doesn't appreciate me. It doesn't provide the returns for me. I certainly have pretty high abilities, and I'm contributing, but this commons is actually working against my interests. And so this is who gets attracted to it, just like the people who move to the alt-right or to the left. These people go to those things because it represents their interests, just like conservatives go to that because they're familial and it represents their interests. So of course most of these things are social, and that's why you'll see me say a lot of the time on these feeds when I'm writing is that, I don't need more friends. I don't need a social order. What I need is, what I want, and I don't want to. I want to ask questions about philosophy, economics, politics, and science. Truth. I don't want to talk about girlfriends. It's just not that. I got friends for that. So yes, you're right. It is quite sad. What's more important, though, is that we should enfranchise these people and bring them into the mold and ostracize the left ones, the excuse makers, like Tucker's turned out to be. I mean, I really love this guy, honestly. He's a good person. I like him, but he's just an excuse maker, like most leftists are. Whereas you can see Tom Woods migrating over. I mean, he doesn't want to. He has various reasons for maintaining a slightly lower profile, just like Molyneux does. But, this is just what's happening. Well, how do we become not domesticated? I don't think it's bad to be domesticated. Domesticated means that doesn't mean that you're going to be weak. It means that you're not impulsive. So it's pretty hard to hold a shield wall. And it's hard to hold formation. You can't do that if you're impulsive. You need to be trained out of it. Well, it's pretty hard to obey the common law. You need to be pretty hard to tell the truth. You need to be trained out of it. So the problem isn't that we need to be undomesticated. The problem is that we need to stop seeking the luxury of leaving the responsibility of defense of the commons, the tribe, and the nation to other people. In other words, we need to stop being free riders. We don't need to stop being domesticated. We need to stop being free riders. Nobody listens to Hop because even the things he's right about are great. The things he's wrong about, he's too proud of. Gary Knight, I'm going to riff off what you say here because I know you don't quite mean this. You say excessive domestication, abundant capital, and the welfare state. Well, there's no resurgence going to happen. This is more free. What I worry about is free riding. As intellectuals, or people who are nerds, or the kind of people who talk a lot, there's a reason the guys who fight don't respect you or me or anybody else, is because they're the ones who do all the work. Now, I view us as calculating. I was trying to come up with plans and options, and for me, I know what my mission is. My mission is to produce a constitution, set demands, a means of transition, a plan for how to arrive there, and a means of a plan for insurrection to raise the cost of not complying with that constitutional restoration to an honest market order. And once I produce that, I'm happy to throw Molotov cocktails, but I've got to do my piece first, my part first, because nobody else has. But there's no event, no external event that's going to save you. There isn't. There's no other people who are going to take leadership other than you. There's only that's what I throw back on the oven mitt crowd. Is that the problem's you, unless you go out there and you understand how fragile the economy is, and you incrementally you for a long period of time, 3 to 9 months, you disrupt the ability of that economy to the point where the military has to take control. That's how you take action. There's nobody going to save you. There's no wishful thinking. You can't sit here and fantasize something's going to happen. This event's going to save us. There's no event that's going to save you. People are saved. People save themselves. I'm a big fan of militia, again, mostly because of the rocket-propelled grenade and the value of artillery. My view is that if you've got rifles, ammunition, a few pieces of night vision, and RPGs, it's really, and you've got artillery anywhere near your borders, and you've got a couple nuclear weapons, a small state is basically, you can't do anything to it. And so I prefer that we devolve into smaller, we force an evolution into smaller states with more progressive internal policies. We do most of what the left wants. We give people lots of support, kinship support, and we reduce the scale of these war machines because they're no longer valuable. I mean, if you can break into $10 million and $5 million regions, and you've got one nuclear weapon and a militia with RPGs, I mean, a rifle's a few $100s and a RPG's $500. And, you're not talking about very high cost of defense. You're talking extremely high cost of offense. Hi, Oksana. Miss you. I don't understand, Felicity, I don't understand believe. What do you mean, any advice for young people to believe in this stuff? What did I order to eat? I ordered a Greek salad, tomatoes, cucumbers, onions, and feta cheese, and some risotto. Okay, I've got to sign off because Lilia just gave me a ring. So thank you for letting me, thank you for providing a willing audience for my talk on the class structures and how those class structures map to argumentative structures being used on the new right, and how we should, as a new right, recognize we probably want to be called the new right, and the new right should include all these different disciplines, and we should recognize them for what they are. Is we've given up on the hopeful strategy and become the resigned people, and the new right no longer holds out hope. We are we are preparing to issue demands or to get to civil war, and I think that's our basic objective. Remember, there's no majority rule doesn't mean anything. Truth matters, and if a minority who enforces truth by violence wins. Thanks a lot, guys.